Step into the squared circle, where the bell echoes through decades, where main events become legends and tag teams tore the house down. From the undercard to the top of the card, this is Portland Wrestling at its finest. One ring, one city, 1,000 stories. This is Ringside in Rose City. And here's your hosts, Frank Culbertson and Mike Rodgers.
Hey, thanks, Lisa. As always, you nailed that introduction. And joining me, as always, is my partner in wrestling history,
Mike Rodgers.
You know, Mike has spent more than 3 decades preserving the history of the Pacific Northwest wrestling. He published Ring Around the Northwest, has written 6 books, refereed matches, announced at Ringside with me, interviewed countless wrestling legends, and somehow still has room for another stack of yellow legal pads sitting next to him, but not much room. If listeners remember the images of Dave Meltzer's room before he cleaned it up a couple of years ago, you get the picture. But there is history all over the place around Mike. If you ask Mike what happened in Portland wrestling, he'll probably tell you. If you ask him when it happened, he'll probably tell you that too. And if the mistake, like I do, of asking him why it happened will settle in, you're about to hear a great story, or should I say stories. Now, here's what makes this show different. Mike and I have absolutely no idea where tonight's journey is going to begin. We've done the research. We've dug through newspapers. We've come, we think, prepared. At least we hope we have. Lisa's job is simple. She loads the wheel with 10 mystery envelopes. She doesn't know which one the wheel is going to choose any more than we do. But once she gives it a spin, we're all along for the ride. So, Lisa, let's see where the ringside wheel takes us tonight and give it a spin.
Here you go.
Thank you. Mike, this is one of the very first envelopes I wrote almost a year ago when we started this podcast. It's a conversation you and I had maybe 100 times while we were working on the Encyclopedia of Portland Wrestlers, available on Amazon. In the encyclopedia, you had a top 10 list of faces, of heels, masked wrestlers, tag teams, top draws, but not this top 10 list. But you and I have discussed this over and over and over and probably over again. And we rarely agreed on the list. So now, Mike, it's time to put up or shut up. It's time to decide who the top 10 Portland wrestling heavyweight champions are in the Portland sports arena era. And who are we going to crown as the top dog? Now, we've done a Mount Rushmore Portland wrestling episode. Fans can check that out on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. And that was Jimmy Snuka, Dutch Savage, Bull Ramos, and Buddy Rose. Now, how would those guys rank on this list? Mike, what's your initial excitement level for this episode?
Oh, yeah, I'm really excited as far and those gentlemen I think we'll be talking about on this podcast. It's interesting when we start ranking them, as far as looking at statistics and looking at wins and losses and things of that nature. When you take statistics and look at something that, to be honest, Frank, I'm going to break something to you. Wrestling is predetermined.
Whoa. Well, let's pause this broadcast, right? Go ahead.
When you take it, and it's a really, really interesting concept when you are applying statistics to a predetermined cause. And it questions us to ask, what are the statistics telling us? They're not really telling us the skill of the wrestler. It's not like batting average in baseball, but statistics are telling us the perception of the promoter, the perception of the fans, and up to debate about exactly what the statistics are telling us something. It's just up to debate about what it is they're telling us.
Statistically, I'm going to be correct tonight. But Mike, before we get to our top 10, let's stop for a moment and talk about how important the Pacific Northwest Championship was. Now, in writing your books, Mike uncovered 110 wrestlers who earned at least one shot at the Northwest Heavyweight Championship. Think about that. 110 men, from future Hall of Famers and world champions to dependable territory veterans and promising newcomers. And they all climbed through the ropes, hoping to have the fans believing that they might actually leave as the Northwest champion. And those opportunities weren't isolated. Mike has documented more than 540 Northwest Championship matches stretching across decades of Portland wrestling. Each one of those matches represented a decision by Don Owen, or if there was a booker at the time, that these two wrestlers on that night were worthy of headlining the card with the territory's richest prize on the line. Now, we've seen the list. Some challengers got one chance and never another. In fact, 50 wrestlers fit into that category. And of those 50, 38 never got another shot at the title, while 12 captured the crown in their only opportunity. Others spent years chasing the championship before finally winning it. Some became one-time champion, exactly 27 wrestlers did. Others won it over and over again. And then there were the wrestlers who didn't necessarily win the title the most, but once they did, they defended it month after month, proving they were trusted to carry the promotion. And I know we're going to have a discussion about specifically one of those people here tonight. That's why this countdown isn't simply, as you mentioned, it's not simply a list of who won the championship the most time. It's a look at who truly defined the Northwest Championship, who carried it, who defended it, who kept coming back to challenge for it, and who built legendary rivalries that made the fans buy another ticket to see what would happen next, because butts in the seats are what mattered in the territory days. Now, Mike and I agree on most of the names on the list, but not always in the order. And I think that's going to become really apparent tonight. And again, statistically, I will be correct. But this is our attempt to identify the 10 wrestlers who did the most with the Northwest Championship and meant the most to its history. We basically agreed on 4 main criteria to use when making our list. They were championships, title defenses, tries as a non-champion challenger, and what we called champion quality of opposition. Each wrestler's most common opponent by that opponent's own championship count. So it's going to be real interesting as we look at like Rose versus Youngblood or Oliver versus Sawyer. And does that mean something different to building the feud with a guy who maybe never won anything? And so I think that explained our methodology, although personal opinion probably slips into the rankings. I know it affected mine. Mike, I'm sure it affected yours, but there's one very important thing left to do because I know how this night's going to go. Lisa, could you put on a referee shirt? Because I think we're going to need it.
No problemo.
Now, before we start our arguments, discuss the list. This is the Portland Sports Arena era that we're looking at. But Portland had some great wrestlers prior to that opening in September of '68. Mike, give me a few names that would top the list of that era or really any era.
Oh, yeah. Before the Portland Sports Arena opened in late 1968, and that's just a really, really nice division point as we examine the history of Portland wrestling. But before the Sports Arena era, you had Nick Bockwinkel, the original Destroyer, Pat Patterson, Mad Dog Vachon, King Curtis, Eric Pedersen, Tony Bourne. Those guys would and did headline any and every territory that they went to. And they were champions. It was kind of a stepping stone in their career, early in most of their careers. But they went on to have absolutely Hall of Fame careers.
And a couple of names that you mentioned there, and one of them, Tony Bourne, who we've been talking about in the Portland Sports Arena shows we've been doing. He was, as we've said, a little long in the tooth, and he's mainly into some tag team matches with Lonnie Mayne and helping manage Lonnie, if you will. But prior to the Sports Arena era, he was the champion 9 times. And Mad Dog Vachon, you mentioned 7 times. Now, when I think of Mad Dog Vachon, just off the top of my head, I don't think of him in that era. I think of him later in his career. And, he was winding down. He was there to put people over and do certain things, but a 7-time champion. But there's a name that I just want you to tell me something about, because Bill Savage was the champion 6 times.
Bill Savage was a solid wrestler, and I got a chance to meet Bill Savage and know him a little bit. He was a very good amateur wrestler. He brought that talent into pro wrestling. He tells a very interesting story of not really being completely smartened up when he started. And he had some workouts very early in his career with Lou Thesz, when Lou Thesz was preparing for a big match in Los Angeles with Baron Michael Leone. Bill Savage, for a moment, got the upper hand, and it almost started a panic within the promotion. And he met up with Lou Thesz years later and reminded him, and Lou Thesz just shook his head. Yeah, I remember that, and a little tip of his head to Bill Savage. Bill Savage had a lot of great success here. It started off as a heel. He had a little bit of a heel look to him, a little bit older than he was, but that amateur background is really, really important, especially in this time period, because pro wrestling looked a lot different than it does now. Everybody needed that basic wrestling ability, and he definitely had it.
Yeah, and again, another person who fans of today, looking back at some of the video that is available, will see him as a referee and not really understand how important he was in the Pacific Northwest at that time as a six-time champion. Luther Lindsay, who I'm just going to tell you isn't on my list, but he was a five-time champion prior to the sports arena. He, of course, would go on to hold it the sixth time in November of '68 before being phased out in 1969. Or Lonnie Mayne, who I think we are both going to talk about, but he won the title five times before the sports arena, ends up with 12 as he absolutely dominated mid 69 to 19 through 1970, a great time in Portland wrestling. So, Mike, we've just talked about before sports arena and after. Do you think eras really matter? What might be the difference in eras?
Yeah, I think eras really do matter. A lot of our podcasts are from month to month, and we're moving through different time periods. And it's funny, even though it's just month segments, it always looks a little different. One wrestler comes in, one wrestler goes out. The matchups look a little bit different. Each window of time is different. It's just who is here, how they are presented. There's one wrestler that's going to be on the list who was extremely successful, and we'll tell you who that is later. If, to be honest, if that wrestler had come in to Portland in a different window of time, that wrestler literally would have been Johnny Mantel. You know, a quality wrestler, but never getting into the main events, just based on who the other wrestlers were here at the time. So eras definitely do matter. Buddy Rose and I once had a conversation. He was telling me anybody can be on top. And it's like Don Owen once told Tom Zink, it's not rocket science. You know, you win your matches, your charisma, your drawing ability, and your popularity improve. And Buddy Rose argued kind of the same thing, but I argued with him back in another vein, saying that the reason that the promoters decide who's going to win, different factors draw into that. Your charisma, your drawing power, and your perception. And it was really interesting because, how do I say this? Buddy Rose was being humble at the moment, but he was actually arguing against him because he has charisma. He had drawing power, and the people's perception of him was very, very strong. So it was a real interesting conversation that we had, him saying that anybody could be popular, anybody could be champion just based on going out and actually pinning somebody.
Yeah. And also, as we look back at other eras where there was not cameras on our phones that could record everything. So there are matches that we know maybe took place in a small town somewhere in Eastern Oregon that wasn't recorded in the newspaper. And despite looking at records that you have or I've looked at, isn't recorded. So we don't have every single match down. But we also want to look at, I think, the declining popularity of Portland wrestling towards the end, different booking priorities that the grappler maybe had. We look at like the grappler, he had 7 championships and only defended it 10 times. Whereas Ed Wiskowski, who we'll talk about, had 2 championships and 33 defenses. So it doesn't mean that the grapplers wasn't as important as Wiskowski's 2. It just meant that there were different booking priorities at that time. And so eras absolutely do matter. Now, one more thing is I mentioned that title defenses are one of the criteria, but defense totals need a caveat, don't they, Mike? Because there's different kinds of defense finishes that can affect whether the person stayed the champion or not, or how they were viewed for winning. Because Buddy as a heel versus Buddy as a face, for example.
And this part's interesting, and we're going to talk about this gentleman. So I won't get into exactly how or what we're going to talk about, but Brett Sawyer won the Northwest Championship in a battle royal. Now, that elevated him immensely, straight out of the preliminaries into the main events. And being a fan, I'm saying like, oh, Brett Sawyer is going to hold the title until his first title defense. And who is going to beat him on his first title defense? But Don Owen and Brett Sawyer fooled us, and he held the title for a long time. But yes, sometimes wrestlers, as we look at their records, they're going to win on DQ, some sort of a different finish. Just off the top of my head, I will say there were certain wrestlers who got much more clean finishes, clean wins than other wrestlers. And again, all of that, when you really kind of scientifically look at it, is going to be perception of mainly the booker or the promoter.
Absolutely. Now, one name that's on the list, Killer Brooks, or excuse me, Bad News Brooks is what we should call him. He never did win the title, but that doesn't mean that he was a bad opponent for the champion, does it?
No, absolutely not. You think of the history of Portland wrestling and who has been here. And when you think of Killer Brooks, I'm kind of reminded or surprised that he did not hold the championship because he was on top. He was that prototypical heel that Don Owen loves. He loves a wrestler with size. He loves a heel wrestler who has that scruffy look. You think about Rasputin and other guys like Killer Brooks. I'm surprised that he did not, but he definitely was on top and he definitely drew money.
Okay, Mike. So we both made lists of the top 10, but we also made lists of guys who were champions that almost made the list. So, Mike, who almost made the list? Let's start at number 15 for you.
Number 15 for me is Bobby Jaggers. I think he held the title 4 times. He came in as a babyface, turned heel. I think he held the belt as a heel as well. A down period of time, he's feuding with guys like Mike Miller, Ricky Vaughn, but Bobby Jaggers had charisma, incredible charisma, and he really was a bright spot at the time. So I think his title reigns need to be remembered.
I did not have Bobby Jaggers on any of my top 15 wrestlers. At number 15 for me was, and I hate Lynn, I know you're listening to our show and you tell me you love the podcast all the time. So Grappler, I'm really sorry, but I had the Grappler at number 15. Now, he had 7 championships, which is tied for the third most in the championship reigns, but he only had 10 title defenses and a comparatively, for me, lower quality. His run in 87 to 91 comes late in the territory. It's a really, I'll just call it a thin roster. I'll be generous. And so I don't think his championship reign of quality opponents, I think really hurts him. A great guy, really made some difference in the booking in Portland, but I don't think his title defenses against 7 reigns makes him in the top 15. He's at 15 for me. Do you have Grappler listed at all?
I do. I have him at number 11. And I agree with what you said, but I want to add one more thought into that. His booking, coming off of what we had seen before, his booking was fantastic. However, the one thing that I would disagree with his booking style, previously there was such a pecking order. You knew who should beat who in just about every match. Not necessarily would that come true, but there certainly was a booking or a pecking order through the 70s, through the first part of the 80s. And when Grappler took over, that line was blurred. And you have later on in his booking, you have Scott Peterson, who was somebody you would consider a tag team wrestler as part of the Southern Rockers. He became Northwest champion. Rex King, another member of the Southern Rockers, he became Northwest champion. And those were people who you would be shocked now, 30, 40 years later, that they were included in as Northwest champions. C.W. Bergstrom, the very last Northwest champion, rose from Grappler's booking tenure from literally the bottom person of the totem pole to being the last champion. So blurring the lines takes away any wrestler during this time period, which I believe was a great time period. But things were so fast moving, so fast evolving, trying to figure out what's going to work and trying to pick up on that kind of that era where your attention speeds up so fast. That time period is throwing so much at you so quickly. The champions change, the turns are made over and over as the weeks go on. So that's why Grappler, a good quality wrestler, a good champion, is stuck at number 11 for me.
Okay. So who's number 14 on your list?
Number 14 is Ron Bass. And Ron Bass is one of those perfect heels for Portland. Big size, could talk, had charisma, immediately got into a feud with Lonnie Mayne. And I love it when they do this. They take imaginary issues from other territories and they bring it into Portland. And it makes those feuds, you can see what's happening in front of the cameras in Portland, but your imagination runs to what happened in other territories. And that's exactly what they did when they brought that feud here. You are already excited because you know they have issues from the past. And I think Ron Bass was a really quality wrestler, and I think he had a really good run in Portland. It was shorter than I would have liked, but I think he had a really good run.
So he's not on my list either. And Lisa, I think you're going to have to step in here because I'm getting pretty heated already. But number 14, you mentioned that Bass's run was short. You'd liked it longer. Another guy who was on my list at number 14 had a relatively short run compared to what people believe, but I had Rick Martel at number 14. He only had 2 championships. He only defended it 15 times, but he had an extremely, if we look at high quality, high volume feud with Buddy Rose. Rose 11-time champion. And so Rick Martel and them had most of his 15 defenses was against Buddy Rose. So we have what I'll call the Wiskowski factor, which few championships, an enormous number of defenses, as we'll get to. The Brett Sawyer factor, you've kind of hinted at, few championships, but very long reigns. I'm going to add the Martel factor. He probably had the highest quality championship resume of anyone in Portland. He didn't spend years chasing or defending the title. He was just here a year, but all of his championship matches really were against Buddy Rose in one of the hottest championship feuds the territory ever produced, and we've had some. He's a great wrestler and would go on to win the AWA title. But for me, in Portland, just not enough championships to make the top 10. Is he on your list at all?
He is on my list, and he's in the top 10. I agree with everything that you mentioned. Jumping to the spot that he is, for me, I have him at number 8. And an interesting analyzation, we're going way farther than the average fan, but when you look at Rick Martel, I once heard the question of what Portland wrestler was most ready to be a world's champion. And you take in all the considerations. Were they reliable? Were they a drawing card that they didn't need the title? When we're talking, it's like Billy Jack. Well, it's not, I'm not breaking any news when I say maybe Billy Jack isn't reliable enough to be the NWA champion. Roddy Piper. Roddy Piper doesn't need the NWA championship. He's going to be a draw wherever you have him, whatever territory he is. He just doesn't need the title. Rick Martel, to me, fit almost everything that you could throw at as far as being a world's champion. Working ability, charisma, his look. Maybe the only thing is, I don't know, you'd like your world's champion to be a Harley Race who could go into a bar and clear it out and come back out and wipe one little bit of sweat off your brow. I don't know if Rick Martel was that person, but that's the only negative I could think of in arguing against him being a world's champion. And then he did become AWA world's champion.
And I will disagree. I think Martel could actually go in and clear out the bar if he was the model and he was using that pump sprayer and he blinded everybody. That would work, but
he could probably clear out the ladies from the bar for sure.
Absolutely.
Follow me.
Oh, so no, number 8 is a surprise to me. Another thing for Martel was, other than the championship matches, most of his matches were in a tag team, but a great time period with the Sheep Herders in that year in 1980. So who's number 13 on your list?
Before I reveal this, you have to bring Lisa in to step in between us.
Okay,
Stan Stasiak is at 13 for me. Speechless.
No, I will tell you right now, I have Stan at number 12, so I'm absolutely okay with this.
We agree. That's great.
That's great. Because I know what the numbers say. Now, if we were talking about some other years in the WWF where the talent wasn't as good, then that would make Stan a little different. But against the talent in Portland, Stan number 12. But why is he number 13 for you?
For me, Stan's best years in Portland were mid and late 60s. And by the time he came up, he would return here. One thing that I really think hurt him, he came in as a heel, he turned babyface. We've been documenting 1969, and kind of a surprise that I'd forgotten about. He turned heel, At some point, he immediately turns back to babyface. And then later in 1983, 84, he turns heel again. So over his career in the Northwest, at least three back and forth heel babyface turns. And I always believe one is the optimal amount of turns. And when you keep turning back and forth, each time it kind of takes a little luster off of you. So that doesn't damage his skill and his ability, but I think maybe it damages his drawing ability in Portland. When he wins the WWF World's Championship, he's past his prime in Portland. Not his overall career, but in Portland, he had seen better days. You know, the time periods that we're talking about in the early Portland sports arena, you know, he had his run. I feel he had just a little bit of lack of charisma. His finishing hold, the heart punch, when he cocked somebody's arm, getting ready to deliver the heart punch, that was a very exciting moment to see if he was going to be successful with that finishing move. And then at that moment, his charisma grew. And this isn't to take anything away from him. His size helped him in Portland. His title runs, as we really examine them, just are not that memorable for me.
Yeah, and if you went to the pre-sports arena era and you looked at some of his feuds with Lonnie Mayne in the 60s, that would really help. But in the sports arena era, he had 3 championships, only 11 defenses, took him 18 tries, so not a lot to win the championships. But in 71, he had a small run as champion that was good. But like you mentioned, by 79 and 84, when he had some other runs, he really had become an old Stan Stasiak. And, you know, we played an interview of him talking about when he had retired and came back because he was working at the sporting goods store. And it's just was kind of a real letdown for me for Stan Stasiak at number 12. But that's the way it works here. Now, for me at number 13 was Roddy Piper. Where do you have Roddy Piper?
I have Roddy Piper at number 10. And yes, we're focusing on title reigns, but Roddy Piper's charisma just overpowers almost any category that we could create. And he just, in my opinion, deserves to be in the top 10, primarily because of his charisma. You know, he feuded with Buddy Rose in this time area when he was champion. I believe he met Rip Rogers during this time period. He had some definitely good title defenses. I feel like his title defenses were a little bit short. Also interesting, I think one of his title defenses was ended by Stan Stasiak, which is a kind of a strange matchup, a strange feud, and a strange watching the title go from one wrestler to another wrestler.
Yeah, that would have been a clash of styles really in the ring because Stan at that time, as we mentioned, getting old. For me, he only had 2 championships. He did have 23 defenses, and Buddy Rose, as you mentioned, was his top rival. Rose, 11-time champion, so that they only wrestled in championship matches 7 times, which surprised me because the Piper Rose feud is so legendary in Portland, but a lot of their matches were stipulation matches, and the championship wasn't necessary for those matches to draw because just the two people, as you mentioned, his charisma was what brought people in. It wasn't that he was the champion, it was that he was wrestling Buddy Rose and they hated each other.
Exactly right. Yeah, it's probably, as I look through the list, probably the only wrestler where being champion was the secondary issue. It's exactly as you said. People came to see him because of his charisma, because of his athletic ability, and because of his antics.
Yeah.
And just that he was champion is secondary.
So who do you have at number 12? Because I had Stan.
I have Lord Jonathan Boyd at number 12, and he had several good title reigns. His first title reign, he beats Kurt Von Steiger in, I believe, about 1970, 71, and a heel versus heel feud, a great tag team feud, the Royal Kangaroos versus the Von Steiger brothers. Boyd does not turn babyface in this feud, or the Kangaroos, which, you know, we keep talking about over and over. I'm come to the belief that Don Owen loved heel feuds. That first title reign was a very good title reign. He went on to hold the title a few more times. And to be honest, Johnny Boyd was here off and on much of 20 years. And anybody, Roddy Piper would become stale after 20 years. So he becomes a little stale as the years go on. I don't have the last time he held the Northwest title. It's probably like 80, 81. And in this instance, his title reign loses some of its luster because he was here so long. He became stale, and that kind of hinders your memory of how good that first title reign was.
I had him real close to, you have him at 12. I have him at 11. Three championships, 27 defenses. His signature rival really was Killer Brooks, who we talked about, who never won the title, which normally would hurt his ranking. But because Brooks was such a good wrestler, that you mentioned heel versus heel, that's what you're absolutely talking about. Boyd also feuded with Kurt Von Steiger and then had some matches with Ed Wiskowski. So really, those are what made Jonathan Boyd. He did have face challengers. He fought Piper. He challenged by Dutch Savage, and those were all brutal. But Johnny Boyd was a great wrestler and had that charisma that you mentioned with Piper, but in a different way, where if you heard Johnny Boyd on his interviews, you couldn't look away because he was looking right in the camera. Him and his tag team partners were just top of the, when they came in, like the sheep herders would come in later before they became bushwhackers, really violent and really captured the imagination of the fans.
Yeah, I think what you're looking for there is he really had intensity, absolute intensity during his matches, during his feuds. One interesting feud that we have not mentioned is Johnny Boyd versus Bull Ramos. And that feud rolled around a couple different times. Again, heel versus heel, mostly singles matches because Ramos could never keep a tag partner. Although I will say, Bull Ramos and Jesse Ventura versus the Royal Kangaroos was an unbelievable series of matches. I remember they met on a Saturday night and they were already booked to wrestle on a Tuesday night. And that match on that Saturday night was absolutely a match that you could have seen happen in an ECW arena. There was that much carnage. There was that much action. They, all four, I think three of them juiced in this match. It was quite the memorable match. So, Johnny Boyd easily, when you remember the good Johnny Boyd, he easily could be up higher on this. He was involved in an auto accident in the probably early to mid 80s. And we saw him after the fact, through the Grapplers booking era. And he wasn't obviously the same athletic wrestler that he was. He still had charisma and mystique about him. But being around for so long hurts that memory of that really, really good run from the early to mid 70s.
Yeah, he really, I argued with myself between numbers 10 and 11, and Boyd almost made number 10. But the person in number 10 was an emotional choice for me. I'll just tell you that. But yeah, and in 1971, the Kangaroos 72 were just absolutely amazing in Portland. So, Mike, I had him at 11. Who do you have at 11?
We touched on him earlier. I have Grappler at 11.
Grappler. That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the almost made it list. And now comes when I'm just going to tell people listening, I'm right and Mike's wrong, no matter what he's going to say. So, Mike, let's go to number 10 on the list. Who is number 10 on your list?
My number 10 is Roddy Piper. We had mentioned him earlier, and we went through kind of the laundry list of reasons. The only reason he isn't any higher for me is his length of title reigns were not that long.
And so my number 10, as I mentioned, that emotional bias kicks in for me, and that was Lonnie Mayne. 7 championships during the Portland Sports Arena, 12 defenses, 20 tries. His top rival really was Kurt Von Steiger, surprisingly, who was a 3-time champion, had 4 matches. But Mayne he was chaos during that time period. He has a top 10 number of championships and a healthy challenger total. His defense count is lower than Boyd's or Wiskowski's and several others, but his title history is chaotic. It involved injuries, blood stoppages, disqualifications, although there was only 2 title changes with Rip Kirby, which surprised me. Kirby won it twice and lost it twice. Those, as we've been talking about, some of the bloodiest matches in Portland wrestling history, and Kurt Von Steiger. So I think he was great. The angle that they did to take the title off of him with Beauregard taking his place in the championship when Mayne was hurt by the Von Steigers. And then, as we'll look at in late 69 and 70, the Beauregard feud with Mayne is gigantic. But for me, just how important he was to the Portland territory in that time period. Of course, he would pass away just a few years later. But Lonnie Mayne for me is number 10.
Yeah, I have him higher, and maybe we'll touch on exactly where I have him. Exactly the reasons you mentioned. I think the fans loved Lonnie Mayne. I think they liked Dutch Savage, they liked Rick Martel, they liked Stan Stasiak, they liked Bobby Jaggers when he was a babyface. It's the one difference that I could really say about the other babyface. Fans in Portland loved Lonnie Mayne. And and yes, he was a wrestler who the fans knew they were going to get their money's worth. They didn't know how it was going to go. If Lonnie was going to bleed buckets, if Lonnie was going to kick ass. Many times it was both. Lonnie was a Portland style wrestler because he would bleed many of his matches. As we're working through, he bled in even the smallest towns. So he provided that for the fans. His charisma is different than Rick Martel, obviously, but he really connected with the fans in a way that I don't think any other wrestler on our list did.
Yeah, and you mentioned Piper and his cadence and his charisma. Mayne had a different kind of charisma, didn't he? His interviews memorable, but not at the same way that Roddy Piper's interviews were.
You talk about Roddy Piper and whether he was a babyface or a heel. When he was done, even if he was a heel, you would say like, God, Roddy Piper is cool. Lonnie Mayne didn't come off cool, but he came off like a tough guy, but a funny, tough guy. He had a lot of humor in his interviews. Even when he had issues that he was really upset or angry about, he was likable, but I don't really think you would label him as cool. So a little bit different distinction there. You look at this list and which of these wrestlers would, if you time traveled and put them into today, would they be still main eventing? I don't know if Lonnie Mayne would still be main eventing. I don't know if that charisma would transfer to today.
And he was more of a brawler type wrestler. Of course, coming off the top rope with the knee that he did that nobody else in Portland was doing would still translate today. But yeah, he was an action wrestler that Don Owen liked, but a different kind of action wrestler. He was the brawler.
Exactly.
Throwing a lot of punches. But Lonnie Mayne was number 10 for me. So whose is your number 9?
My number 9 is Billy Jack. And Billy Jack, obviously it's a sad story because, I mean, how it turns out, his demons that he fought and how it affected his business, because he easily could have been way up the ladder. Fans, here I mentioned that they loved Lonnie. They loved Billy Jack in a different way. He came across so humble and so happy to wrestle for the Portland crowd. And he had an intensity. He had an intensity as a babyface and off the charts as a heel. He had great feuds with Buddy Rose, and he had good feuds with the Grappler. He had very good feuds with Rip Oliver, and he exchanged heel and babyface. He could have been so much higher because for his work, I have a lot of respect for. Obviously, his business decisions, his reliability end up hurting him both locally and the different promotions that he worked around the country. It was not unheard of him to just leave a territory without any notice. And that catches up with him, as his career goes along.
Yeah, it would make it hard for the promotion to plan him as the champion. But I had him at number 6, 5 championship, 12 defenses, and basically because of the strength of the challengers that he wrestled against. His top rival, as you mentioned, Rip Oliver, who's the 12-time champion. They wrestled each other for championships 10 times. It's one of those feuds that we mentioned, Piper and Rose. Haynes and Oliver is another one that sticks out in people's minds. So his 10 defenses against Rip Oliver, who has the wrestler with the most championships, for me really helps. He had some great matches. Besides that, he wrestled Dynamite Kid early, which had to have been
I would have
an
loved to see that.
exciting match to
Oh
see
yeah.
those two guys, Dynamite Kid in 1983. That could have been something really, really special. But, and I agree that if he had been more reliable, that he could have been even higher up on my list if he would have then longer title reigns. But he did not, and we know how that all turned out. So that was your number 9.
Yes.
Who is number 8 on your list? Oh, did I tell you who's my number 7?
No.
I'm going to. It's Dutch Savage.
Ah.
And I know I can hear people on the internet screaming at me right now, but 7 champions, that's a good number. 17 title defenses. And his most common opponents were Ramos and Ventura. And so they kind of split those defenses up. And I think that hurts him a little bit because Ventura was not, Ramos was a great wrestler. Ventura was a wrestler. And that's what I'll say. So I think that hurts him a little bit.
What hold did Ventura like to use?
Ventura might have used the full Nelson.
Oh, I don't know why that thought just came into my mind.
And that just reminds me of him having the full Nelson on and Bull Ramos coming in and lighting the lighter to burn his fingers to make him break the hold that time. That was spectacular. He was foundational. His feud with Bull Ramos, we mentioned one of those feuds that people will talk about forever. Great matches with Johnny Boyd, with Ed Wiskowski. He was really balanced, but I don't think him as a champion carried the territories when he was the champion. I think it was his tag teams with Snuka, his matches against Bull Ramos, which for championships were rarely the step matches that we all know about, the strap matches or the coal miner glove matches. But Dutch for me is number 9. But he would be higher and was higher in the who's the Mount Rushmore. He was up there on that list. But for me as a champion, he was only at number 9. So we're takes to number 8. Mike, who is number 8?
Number 8 for me was Rick Martel. We mentioned his qualifications for me, at least earlier. We touched on that.
Okay. So for me at number 8 is Jimmy Snuka. 6 championships, 18 defenses. His top rival was really Jesse Ventura, who was a 3-time champion. Snuka's mid-70s run. I had some weird bookkeeping moments. In Seattle, they had advertised Ventura as the champion, even though the title had switched 2 weeks before. So to make up for it, they had that match become a DQ and held the title up. Interesting that we've talked about Portland, Salem, and Eugene not on the same page. Seattle and Portland not on the same page. But Snuka's a strong selection. He has 6 title reigns, more defenses than Savage or Jay Youngblood. His history connects Bull Ramos, Ripper Collins, who you've mentioned earlier, Rasputin, Johnny Boyd. So I think he overall carries a lot of weight. And if you mentioned Roddy Piper and his interview ability, that's really what carried Jimmy Snuka to the top.
and you didn't want to miss a Jimmy Snuka interview. You don't know what he was saying, but you didn't want to miss it, brother.
I mentioned Ripper Collins, and I know you love Ripper Collins. Snuka and Collins exchanged the championship a lot in 1974, and I don't remember all of their matches, but those were really classic matches. Snuka was really in his prime, and Ripper Collins could still go in 1974.
Yeah, I don't have Ripper Collins on my list, despite my opinion that Ripper Collins was the greatest heel that I have ever seen.
Yeah.
I don't have him on this particular list. I know he held the title a couple times. He actually held the title once, I just noticed, in 1967 before the Portland Sports Arena era. I only remember him wrestling Snuka and Dutch Savage in title defenses. And so I can't give him a spot on this list as far as being a champion.
Yeah, I did not have Collins on either, but where did you list Jimmy Snuka?
I have Jimmy Snuka at number 3.
Whoa, why is that?
As we go along on my list, my bias is definitely, and I can see that here, in the early 70s, which may be just my absolute favorite time of analyzing what was happening on Portland wrestling, of noticing every word that was spoken on Portland wrestling, all the nuances, all the matchups. And Jimmy Snuka had unbelievable charisma, especially at that time, babyface charisma. He looked fantastic at this time period, even better than he would later in his career. And I'm sure, well, let's see, was he on steroids at this time, or was it just youthful, great looks and lineage?
We're going to say great youthful looks.
Yeah. I think he looked just as good here as he would later on in his career when he undoubtedly was on steroids. And that transcends to his popularity. I think Snuka had a lot of different opponents. I think he met up with Killer Krupp. I think he wrestled guys like Tor Kamada. I think maybe not as champion, but he stretched as far as Austin Idol. I think Rasputin, I think he had a big variety of opponents. Jesse Ventura, Iron Sheik, he was around through early to past mid 70s. A really nice run and champion a lot of that time period.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about 1978 coming up here in just a little bit. So I had him at 8 and you had him higher. I think we're at number 7. Who is your number 7?
Why don't you go first? Because if you want to.
Oh, number 7 is Bull Ramos.
Oh, yes, Lisa.
Lisa's on my side, aren't you, Lisa? Pay attention, Lisa. She's off on her own, and I don't know what's happening, Mike. I think we're going to have something coming up here because this is something going on over there. Bull Ramos, 4 championships, 16 defenses, top rival, Lonnie Mayne. They had 5 matches for the championship. His early 70s feud with Dutch Savage, Lonnie Mayne, both give him a solid opponent quality count. His matches with Snuka in 73 and 75 that ended his reigns, ended a run against some really strong opponents. He won fewer championships than several wrestlers, but his 16 defenses and 19 challenger appearances show prolonged main event relevance. And that goes to where you talked about at the very beginning. How did the promotion use the wrestler? So Bull Ramos could be a challenger 19 times, only win it 4 times, and it didn't hurt him at all because he was Bull Ramos. And he was going to inflict tons of punishment on the champion when he was trying to take the title. And even if he lost, Bull Ramos was going to lose and still keep his heat. He had great matches against Savage. Stephen Littlebear is an underrated champion who I know I don't have on my list. But Bull Ramos, for me, is number 7. You want to tell us where he is on yours?
I'm going to let it be a surprise where he is on my list. But the one thing that I will say to comment on your comments, he didn't have multiple title reigns because he rarely lost the title.
Well, okay.
And I'm going to hold the rest of my comments on Bull until a little bit later.
But he only had 16 defenses, so maybe he wasn't putting the title up often enough.
Wrestlers were afraid to challenge him for the title.
So who was your number 7 then?
Okay, Rip Oliver was my number 7.
Oh, boom goes the dynamite. Are you kidding me?
Now, I know Rip Oliver held the title, more times than any other wrestler?
12 times.
I alluded to this a little bit earlier. If Rip Oliver had come into the Northwest in 1979, Rip Oliver wouldn't have been in main events. He would have literally been Johnny Mantel because you had Adrian Adonis, Ron Starr, Dutch Savage was still going, Stan Stasiak was there, Buddy Rose, Ed Wiskowski, Roddy Piper, Killer Brooks. There would not have been any room for Rip Oliver. And all of these other wrestlers, every wrestler on the list, no matter what time period they would have come into the Northwest, they would have been in main events. So I'm holding that against Rip Oliver a little bit. Now, let's look at his success. He only became the top wrestler when Buddy Rose left. And now we are going to look at his success. He was champion. He carried the promotion through that early 80s when Buddy Rose left all the way up to 1987. There were good moments and bad stretches. One of the matches that I most was looking forward to was the Road Warriors versus Bruiser Brody and Rip Oliver in one of the main events of one of the extravaganzas. And it was a short match, under 5 minutes. And I was extremely happy to see the Road Warriors, and I was extremely happy to see Bruiser Brody. And I was extremely happy to see Bruiser Brody wrestle the Road Warriors. But there is no denying that the wrestler that totally stole that match was Rip Oliver. And he was working his butt off. He did something that I had never seen before. In a tag match, he's on the apron, he tags in, and he climbs the turnbuckles from outside the ring to enter the ring. And it was just something that was very unique. I never saw him do it again. You know, it was kind of a babyface move to do that, but he worked very hard to show that he belonged in the ring with those three other legends. He was the booker during this time, so a lot of his success can be attributed to him being the booker.
Wait, are you saying bookers sometimes put themselves on top?
They
Steve
could.
Dole?
They could do that. So he deserves to be in the top 10 as far as the success that he had, but he's in the lower part of my top 10. We touched on this perception of the wrestlers. And there's a phrase that is kind of been attributed to Rip Oliver. When he left Portland, he was a small fish in a big pond. And that's his success here did not translate to any other promotion.
Yeah. So I have him at number 2. So if I had gone strictly by numbers, and I'm a numbers guy, but if I went strictly by numbers, he'd be number 1 because 12 championship, most of anyone, 47 title defenses, most of anyone, 34 times trying to become the champion, second most of anyone. But what hurt him and put him down to number 2 is his top rival was Brett Sawyer in championship matches. They had 8 matches. And as you mentioned, Brett Sawyer, not the strongest of champions on this list. But Rip Oliver, he was there in the promotion, carrying the promotion. He had Rip Oliver's clan, which was a big draw. So he falls behind who I put at number 1, mostly because of who his challengers were in the title matches. We know that he had feuds with Billy Jack, but they weren't championship matches. And interesting, this also hurt him for me. You mentioned Brett Sawyer winning the title in a battle royal. Rip Oliver also won the title in a battle royal. Not one of his first ones, but later on. And he won the battle royal in Eugene against some, really, if you look at the wrestlers that were in a lesser competition at that time, Billy Jack had been the champion. And as you mentioned, Billy might be a little bit unreliable, and he had just left town, so they vacated the title. But I had Rip Oliver at number 2. I think Brett Sawyer really does hurt him. I'm sure we'll be talking about Brett Sawyer because I think you probably have him at number 1. Let's see, who do you have at number 6?
Number 6, I have Lonnie Mayne. And we talked a little bit about how he fit into the championship scene. Kind of a wrestler who he held the title numerous times, but one of those type of wrestlers who wouldn't need to hold the title and still be a gigantic draw in Portland.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you mentioned that because, and not to disparage Brett Sawyer, but Brett Sawyer really needed the championship to be able to be moved into the main event. So you're absolutely right. I mentioned that I had Billy Jack at number 6. So who do you have at number 5?
Number 5, I have Ed Wiskowski.
Oh, Lisa, I have Ed Wiskowski at number 5. Mike and I agree.
Oh my gosh, we agree.
Whoa, what is wrong?
Lisa can take a break.
Yeah, she's been on a break the whole time. If you can see what she's doing now, you can. And this one, I have to tell you, when I went through the rankings, Ed Wiskowski, never my favorite wrestler. This really surprised me that I put him at number 5. Why do you have him there?
I have him at number 5 because he was on top in a really strong period of time. I think he comes here in 1975. I think he kind of replaced Jesse Ventura as the top heel when Ventura left. He immediately starts teaming with Buddy Rose. But this is the thing that I think will be lost because people will remember Ed Wiskowski as Colonel De Beers and kind of his gimmicks
Mega
that
Maharishi Ahmed.
Mega Maharishi Ahmed that he kind of leans on more in the 80s. But when he first came to Portland, he was a fantastic athlete. He looked and wrestled like a young Harley Race. And I believe Harley Race had a hand in training him. His headbutts off the top rope that he was using in a finisher looked exactly like Harley Race, and really, really a devastating move. They looked great. And he was in shape, a good interview. You know, he had a wit to him. He had a smarminess to him. And he had a good look. He looked good.
Yeah, you mentioned the wit that he had. He was a different interview than anybody else in Portland during those years. He was almost having fun with himself, but you had to take him seriously because he could back it up in the ring. You know, that he was being pushed with Buddy Rose, of course, but yeah, Ed Wiskowski, only two championships, so that would seem like he's not going to be up very high, but he had 33 defenses. He only had 12 matches as a challenger, but his 33 defenses comes at a time when, as you mentioned, 1978, you mentioned some of the crew. Ventura was here, Rose, Snuka, the Iron Sheik, John Anson, Gino Hernandez was here for a short bit. Dutch was here. Austin Idol made his appearance. Johnny Boyd, the Von Steigers returned for a period. Lanny Holiday was here. And then in October, two new guys came in, Bad News Brooks, and then some guy named Roddy Piper debuted. I don't know who he was. This crew was loaded, and yet Wiskowski was the champion most of that year. He defeated Dutch Savage 2 out of 3 falls in November of 77 to win the title. And he had some repeated time limit draws with Jimmy Snuka, which really goes to show you how they were building Snuka up and keeping Wiskowski on top. But when you're going to draws with him, those times. In 78, he defended against Ventura, against Oates, against Snuka, against Boyd in heel versus heel matches. Most all of them ended in DQs, which kept the title hot during that time period because Ed was cheating to win. Cheating! Dastardly champion. Ed Wiskowski, number 5. Mike, we agreed. Should we just stop the show right now?
Probably.
No, but we can't. We're not there yet.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking.
Mike, did you just hear that? The captain speaking? What, Lisa, what was that? What are you wearing?
Cabin crew, prepare for departure.
Departure? Where the heck are we going? Mike, look at Lisa. I think she thinks we're going on a trip. Mike, grab your passport because Lisa is standing at the terminal in a red and black flannel shirt, a fur-lined hat, and snowshoes. There's no coconut bra on this trip. She's carrying a hockey stick in one hand, a gallon of maple syrup in the other, and she's drinking maple syrup from a travel mug. But knowing Lisa like I do, I'm guaranteeing that's not maple syrup in that mug. She got a plate of Tim Hortons donuts balanced on her suitcase. She's apologized to the customs agent 6 times already and apparently believes all of Canada is located somewhere near the North Pole. That can mean only one thing. Our bags are packed, our passports are stamped, and it's time for passports to pile drivers. Yes, it's a new part of Ringside in Rose City. Don't worry, listeners. Kayfabe Curveballs, Card Shark, and Island Interlude are not going away. I just thought it was a good time to test Mike's wrestling knowledge in a new way. So on to Passport on Pile Drivers, where we'll be going to different countries, and I'll ask Mike questions about wrestlers from that country. And as you already can guess, today's destination, Canada. Mike, you know I love me some masked wrestlers. The interns, the medics, the assassins, the grapplers, the infernos, Mil Mascaras, and of course, the greatest of all, the Claw. So let's visit Canada and test your knowledge of masked wrestlers and who they really were. I'm going to start with some easy ones for you, Mike, because it's our initial show of this, so we want to take it easy. This wrestler from Montreal, Quebec, Canada, worked for the Windsor promoter George Crybaby Canyon early in his career. At one point, Canyon put this guy under a mask and gave him the moniker El Santos, clearly an attempt to get the rub from El Santo. Mike, who was this man who also worked in Portland in 1980 and 1981?
I believe that would be Rocky De La Sera.
Oh, Mike, you are 1 for 1 in this new gimmick. But it is Rocky De La Sera. In his book, Wrestling with a Rocky Life, which is absolutely fantastic. Everybody should buy it. Rocky says that George would put anybody who was 5'8", 230 pounds in the gimmick. George booked Bob De La Sera, Terry Yorkston, and Matt Gilmore. Mike, who's Matt Gilmore?
Matt Gilmore wrestled around the Northwest as Duncan McTavish.
Absolutely. And in all, at least 8 guys played the gimmick. So you never know who El Santos was going to be. But in this case, it is Rocky De La Sera. Okay, Mike, second, let's look at another masked wrestler. This time, it's Vancouver All-Star Wrestling in April of 1981. This guy put the hood on and wrestled for a few matches as Destroyer number 2. Now, we've had a lot of Destroyers that have worked Portland, and sure enough, even this guy worked Portland, but not as a Destroyer gimmick. Mike, who do you think All-Star Wrestling was Destroyer, not number 1, Destroyer number 2?
There could be a theme here. I believe that was Rocky De La Sera.
Oh, Mike is 2 for 2. He's picking up on the clues. That's right. It's Rocky De La Sera again. Rocky had actually been Destroyer number 2 previously when Joe Ventura was doing a 6-week tour. Mike, who's Joe Ventura?
Joe Ventura wrestled in Portland as Joe Lightfoot.
Absolutely. And Rocky and Joe Ventura, when you're reading Wrestling with the Rocky Life, you will learn a lot about their relationship. They traveled all around together, a great working relationship. But there's a great story about that mask. Rocky is wrestling Gene Kaninsky in the PNE Gardens. It's a sellout crowd, of course, and Kaninsky gave Rocky a flying mirror, which caused his mask to fly off. Gene did a quick roll-up for the pin, and the fans popped huge. They ran down to ringside yelling, "That's Rocky De La Sera! That's Rocky De La Sera!" Even as Rocky tried to hide his face. That's a great, great wrestling story. Okay, Mike, final question. Who is this masked wrestler? For his first maritime summer, this man donned the mask and worked as UFO number 2. Now, before you answer, you might be thinking of the UFO, who we know was who, Mike?
The original UFO was Bob De La Sera, who is also known as Carl Steiner.
Absolutely. That is correct. UFO was Bob De La Sera, but this is not him because we're talking about UFO number 2. So to go 3 for 3, I don't think you can do it, Mike. Who was UFO number 2?
Rocky De La Sera.
Oh, Mike, you're 3 for 3. You were correct again. Rocky De La Sera worked several hooded gimmicks at the request of promoters. And you can read, as we've mentioned, all about Rocky and his career in Wrestling with a Rocky Life, available now. And I highly, highly recommend it. One of the best wrestling books I've ever read. And thanks to Rocky for appearing on Ringside in Rose City a month or so ago. Be sure to check out that podcast on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. It's a great interview.
Attention passengers, we've now reached our destination. We hope you enjoyed the flight and have a nice day.
Well, Mike, they're calling us back to the plane, so that's going to do it for the first stop in Passport to Pile Drivers. We've learned a little wrestling history, we stamped another page in your passport, and we've learned a lot about Rocky De La Sera. And unfortunately, we've also learned that you're now putting maple syrup on absolutely everything. I just watched you pour it on a hot dog. That is wrong. Lisa says it's perfectly normal, but I'm not so sure about that. Lisa's not perfectly normal. But Lisa, grab your hockey stick, finish your Tim Hortons, and quit trying to convince airport security that maple syrup counts as a carry-on beverage. Mike, let's head back to Ringside in Rose City, one ring, one city, and 1,000 stories. Mike, who do you have at number 4?
Well, I have Dutch Savage at number 4, and I know you've talked about him. I didn't talk about him too much. Perception, I've used that term, as we look at the champions. And Dutch Savage, for me, had that perception as a champion. When he won the title from Johnny Boyd his first time, Johnny Boyd was a heel. Dutch Savage was babyface, but he had just turned babyface. Dutch Savage was all business in the ring. That's the kind of image that he portrayed as a babyface or a heel. And Dutch Savage could sell incredibly. That was one of the things about him. And one of the things that I didn't really fully understand for years and years, how important selling is, especially for a babyface. And Dutch Savage could really sell, which made his comebacks that more memorable. He would go through all the early 70s as the babyface champion, kind of takes the back seat when Jimmy Snuka comes and Jimmy Snuka starts winning the Northwest title, but Savage keeps himself on top in the tag teams and individual matches where he just not is the champion or he would challenge heel champions. But yeah, Dutch Savage, just all business in the ring. And I think it's that perception that puts me at has me put him at number 4.
And you've talked about a number of times about Don Owen having trust in a guy. And Don Owen obviously had trust in Dutch Savage. He let him run towns. He let him work in the office and do a number of things as his career wound down, doing some television announcing. So Dutch, until Don and Dutch had a falling out, Dutch definitely had the trust of Don Owen. So my number 4 was Jay Youngblood. 6 championships, 17 defenses. He wrestled Buddy Rose 11 times out of those 17 defenses as his top rival. Great matches. Youngblood was a really, really good wrestler. Buddy Rose could really bump for him. So it was really, his title reign was really just one long Buddy Rose program. And you got to love that. So they did hair versus title matches, loser leave town matches, a number of things. His raw totals are below Buddy Rose and Rip Oliver, but I think the quality opposition that he had, his matches against Buddy Rose, to me really, really stand out. So for me, that put him up there as number 4. Where did you have Jay Youngblood ranked?
I don't have Jay Youngblood ranked.
Lisa, number 5 seems like years ago when we agreed. Not ranked? He's not even in your top 15.
It's not in my top 15. And I know that Jay Youngblood was a quality wrestler. I know that. I understand that. He had been here in the preliminaries. He was one of those wrestlers who went away for a little bit, came back, and he's going to be elevated into the main events. Very popular. Fans liked him. I think it's that perception, for me at least, to think of him as a singles champion that early in his career. I picture Jay Youngblood standing next to Dutch Savage or Bull Ramos, and it's hard for me to put Jay Youngblood in that list. And that's not to take anything away from him, but its perception for me just overrides the statistical success of him.
But he was definitely a fan favorite. Absolutely. He wasn't terrible on interviews, but he just wasn't great in my memory of him. I'm not going to ever say, oh, I want to listen to a Jay Youngblood interview, but he was definitely a fan favorite. So, Mike, we're into our top 3. And I know who I have at number 3, and I now think that maybe I had too much bourbon that night. But who do you have at number 3?
I have number 3, Jimmy Snuka.
Oh, okay.
We've talked a little bit about him earlier. The one thing when we really look at this list the way that you intended us to look at it, I think Jimmy Snuka defended the Northwest title against a gigantic variety of wrestlers. Off the top of my head, I bet there would be obviously Bull Ramos, Johnny Boy, Buddy Rose, Iron Sheik, Tor Kamada. There are a big number of different wrestlers that he wrestled. And Ripper Collins, we can't forget that feud, which was a great feud. Rasputin, another great feud. So I think that Snuka belongs on this list, obviously for his perception, for his look, for his charisma. And he held the title a number of times and for a long lengths of time. So that's why Jimmy Snuka is number 3 on my list.
I'm just going to guess right now that this guy is not on your list at all. But my number 3, and again, I go by statistics, folks out there. My number 3 was Brett Sawyer. I know. I know. I told you. I'm sorry. He only had 3 championships, but he had 36 defenses. And his main rival was Rip Oliver, the 12-time champion. So for me, he's the guy who didn't win often, but was the champion for long stretches of time. And I know, again, he's never going to be a guy that I'm just going to have to go look up one of his matches unless it's going to be where he's really bleeding. And he did win the Battle Royal to win it. If you look at the entrants that you know that were in that Battle Royal, nobody thought Brett Sawyer was going to win. Nobody. He was the least likely to win, I believe. But he had long title reigns. He had matches against Oliver, which were really, really good. He could fight from underneath, being really small, probably the smallest champion in Portland, I'm going to say wrestling history, going back before the sports arena. He was really small, although Tony Bourne obviously won, but Tony Bourne, Brett Sawyer, I'm not putting them in the same category. Sorry about that. But it's interesting. He chased after Oliver, didn't win. Oliver would keep the belt by disqualifications, and they built some good chemistry there. Finally, Sawyer does beat Oliver for the title again in Coos Bay, of all places, only lose it back to Oliver at the Sports Arena 3 days later, which was a short title reign. But he is number 3 just because he held the title for so long during not a great time period in Portland wrestling. It was okay. Early 80s were okay. Not what they were in the 70s for sure.
I like the fact that he won the title in a battle royal. I love the unpredictability because you had, in that battle royal, if I remember right, you had Rocky Johnson, Buddy Rose, and David Schultz. And, if you had to bet, if there was a money line, it would have been one of those 3 guys. And just like you said, Brett Sawyer had very good charisma and he was extremely popular, but you never would have bet that he would have won that battle royal. So I love that. I love the unpredictability of that. I think I mentioned earlier in the show that you were expecting him to lose the title on whoever he wrestled in the very first title defense, because it's one thing to give a wrestler a title in a battle royal and surprise and shock everybody, but it's another thing for them to keep that title for the time period that he did. And I actually like that as well because it elevated him. He had popularity that was absolutely unbelievable. So how do I compare this? If you think of other preliminary baby faces earlier in the Portland Sports Arena era, I think of a wrestler like Jim Gagne, a good-looking young wrestler, comparable to Brett Sawyer, and to compare if the same situation came about and he were to win a battle royal and win the Northwest title, it's just kind of unheard of. So I'm proclaiming Brett Sawyer the Jim Gagne version of the 80s.
Wow. So you don't have Brett on your top 15 list at all.
And, I just use that comparison of Jay Youngblood, and if you're standing him next to Bull Ramos and Jimmy Snuka, there is no comparison. And I wish I used that for Brett Sawyer, but I can go one better. If Brett Sawyer were standing next to Jay Youngblood, there would be no comparison.
Oh.
Jay Youngblood would have the perception that Jay Youngblood would be the tougher wrestler. Brett Sawyer is the least, you said the smallest, and I'm going to say the least imposing champion. So they go hand in hand, smallest and least imposing champion. And that's why he does not make my list.
So that's really an interesting point of not intimidating. So why do you think that they kept the championship on him for that many defenses? What was happening that they said, oh, let's put this guy in the main events?
Very interesting because there had to have been a change in the crowd at this point because there's no doubt, I'm not disputing this, Brett Sawyer was a handsome man, and that related to the ladies in the crowd. And I think there was undoubtedly a big upsurge in ladies coming to Portland wrestling at that time period. And there's no doubt he and Tom Pritchard were the catalysts of that. So he was a draw, absolutely. If the category was biggest draws, he would be on my list because I think Brett Sawyer drew money in Portland.
Yeah, and I'll just move on to the next one here, but by saying that being the guy that could fight from underneath and being small like that, the fans could really get into him and want to cheer for him because he was smaller. He didn't deserve to be in the ring against Rip Oliver, but he was in there and he was fighting and he was trying his best. And that's something that wrestling fans could all relate to because, I mean, not all of us have been referees potatoing guys in battle royals.
I want to say this too. As I give him his negatives of why he is not on the list, I will say that he was a good worker as well. And yes, fighting from underneath, there was certainly an appeal to him, and that helped. That absolutely helped his drawing ability.
So we're down to the top 2, and I'm going to guess that I can already figure out your top 2, and you're wrong on one of them. My number 2 I've already talked about was Rip Oliver, but Mike, who is your number 2?
My number 2 is Buddy Rose. And Buddy Rose, even though he held the title numerous times and his title reigns, I feel, meant something, he was in the area a long time before he became champion. I'm going to say 2 years, maybe, before he ended up being champion. He was a wrestler who had so much charisma and so much ability that he didn't need the title. But then when he got the title, I felt he did so much with it. Numerous title reigns, numerous feuds. Jimmy Snuka, Jesse Ventura, obviously Roddy Piper, all those guys that would break up with him, the Sheep Herders, Frank Dusek, Ron Bass, all those tag partners that he was kind of like Bull Ramos as far as the way he treated his tag partners. Lots and lots of breakups, lots and lots of feuds, and a lot of times that Buddy Rose would end up with the final victory and hold on to the title.
Wow. So I have Buddy at number one. 11 championships, 40 defenses, a staggering 60 tries as the challenger. So they kept putting him in the ring as the heel to try to win. His top rivals, we mentioned Jay Youngblood 6 times, who was 6-time champion, 8 matches. He's the only person on the list that's both a dominant multi-time champion and the promotion's most persistent challenger. 60 challenger matches is nearly double anyone else. And he really is the connective tissue from the late 70s to the early 80s. His feuds with Piper, Youngblood, Martel, Steve Regal, Rip Oliver, they all go through Buddy Rose.
Kurt
Hennig. So for me, that Stan Stasiak, I should mention in there, because we got to keep Stan in there at the number one spot up here somehow. For me, that's Portland wrestling is at that time period, that late in that 80s time, late 70s, early 80s was Buddy Rose. And so I put him up there above Rip Oliver just because he's so much, how do I say this? He was so much better than Rip Oliver. Not taking anything away from Rip. Rip could wrestle and Rip could draw and Rip could talk, but Buddy Rose was just different. He's unique in Portland wrestling at this time period.
Absolutely. And I like the way you phrased it, comparing Buddy and Rip and boiling it down. Buddy was just better charisma, a little bit better talker, probably a little bit better wrestler at Buddy's prime.
Better bump taker.
Buddy was, if we had a list of bump takers, Buddy would be number one.
Yeah. So that's my number one. And so I know because we skipped him earlier for you, but just give me your number one and why.
My number one is Bull Ramos. We've talked about perception so much. Bull Ramos had such a great buildup to coming here. It was like the local wrestlers, you're scanning your own crew and you say it on TV that there isn't anybody that's tough enough to face Bull Ramos on his debut. You are literally sacrificing your entire crew that you have to push this wrestler that's coming in. Just to remind people, it's like we need to bring Lonnie Mayne in to face Bull Ramos because Lonnie Mayne is the toughest man that we know who can face this tough wrestler coming in. And that match was so memorable. Here we are 55 years later, and I can remember that match. And the onslaught is Lonnie comes in, Bull Ramos breaks his arm by ramming it into the post repeatedly. And the aftermath is, here's the toughest man that we knew, and the match ends with the toughest man we knew getting his arm broke. Goodness gracious, just how tough is Bull Ramos? And I felt like he went a long time in the Northwest being undefeated. He started, Lonnie was only there that night. So immediately he starts a feud with Dutch Savage, and he gets the better of Dutch Savage and wins the Northwest title. And the thing that I remember so clearly is usually normal title reigns last 3 months. And I'm sure that Dutch Savage had a say in this, but Bull Ramos's title reign went almost exactly a year. And then he lost it very briefly to Stephen Little Bear. And that's a natural feud, and to help get Stephen Little Bear over to the best that they could, they give him a win over Bull Ramos and let him be champion for a short while. And then Bull Ramos wins the title. And if I remember correctly, he's champion for another 6 months.
Yeah.
So yes, he did not have a variety of challengers. We're at Stephen Little Bear, Dutch Savage. Lonnie probably came in to have a title shot or two, but Lonnie wasn't in regularly during this time period. I would imagine Stan Stasiak had a match or two with him as well, but not the variety of wrestlers over this year and a half. And then Jimmy Snuka comes in, and that year and a half, 2 years evolves into the Jimmy Snuka time period. They have a great feud. So we have a couple title reigns right in this time period. But for me, that being champion for a year and then a short break and then being a champion again for another 6 months, the perception of he to be unbeatable, I think that just came through, and I have Buddy Rose at number 2, but unbeatable is not a word that you associate with Buddy Rose. And that was his appeal because anybody could beat Buddy Rose and Buddy Rose would do the job for anybody. That was part of his getting his heat back and maintaining his heat and using losses to create more heat. That's the way Bull Ramos and Buddy Rose are different. Bull Ramos kept his heat by beating everybody or not losing the title to anybody.
And I think kept his heat because when he did lose to like Savage in the coal miner glove matches, they were brutal matches. So you didn't come out of there thinking, oh, he really got beat up. No, he might be bloody, but Savage was going to be bloody too. It was lucky Savage could get out of that with the steel glove and then the strap matches. And we talked about interviews, and he was really, although we have mentioned that there was a guy named Geronimo that came in heel for just a very short while prior to this, he was really the first Native American heel. But people hated Bull Ramos. It wasn't like, oh, boo, we don't like you. No, Bull Ramos, and his interviews, he was, as we've just played one where he talked about white eyes all the time. He was very adamant in his dislike and played the gimmick of the Apache very well.
Yeah, I was reminded from those interviews that we heard just recently of what a good interview he was. Reminded at how exactly what you said, how much heat he could draw on his interviews. He could absolutely draw heat in the ring, but he was equally good with his interviews. Never any humor. It was always very serious. You wanted to see Bull Ramos's matches to see if there was a chance that anybody could get the best of him.
And as Dutch Savage has said, who he had the very best matches of his career against, Bull Ramos could work. He was a big man, but he was smooth and his favorite opponent. But so before we close, Mike, because we've got our top 10 and mine, of course, is correct and yours is okay. And we went to the top 15, looked at the almost list. But Mike, I think knowing you, you've probably got a couple more lists of like top 5 or so guys that you want to talk about in another manner.
Yeah, let's talk about the guys who were surprised that they were not champions, or they very well could have fit into this list and nobody would have batted an eye. I like to think of it more as, oh, this guy wasn't champion. And we'll start at number 1 for me, and that's Killer Brooks, Bad News Brooks. He was on top. I speculate this, but Killer Brooks and Roddy Piper came in on exactly the same day. And it's very rare that 2 top heels will come in because you want to kind of highlight one and then have a starting date of a little bit later if you do need to replenish both of your top heels. But they came in on the same day. My speculation, and it's always been, I don't think Don Owen had planned Roddy Piper would get over to the extent. And I would bet that he, looking at Roddy Piper, he was that young kid with a kind of skinny at the time. I don't think Don Owen probably figured Roddy Piper into the main event mix, but he certainly figured Killer Brooks would be. And just the way that things worked out, Killer Brooks had a few title shots, but it just worked out that he didn't win the title. Number 2 for me is Iron Sheik. He was tag champions. He was a tag partner with Bull Ramos. Bull Ramos did a lot of his speaking for him. And again, I would bet that there was maybe a little hesitation for Don Owen to put the title on Iron Sheik. Maybe he wasn't considered 100% reliable, and that's speculation. I don't think Iron Sheik was loved in the dressing room either. And I bet that had a little bit to do with him not being a champion. He had a lot of single main events against both Savage and Snuka, and successful. He came away with wins, just not the championship. Number 3 for me is the Skull, also known as Bugsy McGraw. I loved the Skull. I loved his gimmick, but I will be the first to say that gimmick didn't need the title, especially when you had Bull Ramos running around as champion at the same time period. You had a big wrestler. The Skull was a big wrestler. They feuded for a short time, which again, Don Owen, I'm sure, loved, and I know that those matches drew very well. But the Skull's gimmick did not need the title. And for some reason, the Skull was not Don Owen's favorite wrestler. Bugsy is kind of related to over the years.
Okay. Now, what about some guys that did hold the title that you go, what the hell was Don Owen thinking about?
A lot of these wrestlers are in the grappler's time period, his booking. And we've talked about how the lines kind of blurred, how the pecking order disappeared, and how literally, if you were to make a pecking order, literally the wrestler on the bottom of the list could main event and could win a match and could win the Northwest title. So those are reflected. C.W. Bergstrom, not taking anything away from any of these wrestlers. It's just a surprise that they did have a run at the Northwest title. So C.W. Bergstrom, Coco Samoa was not in the grappler area when he was champion, but a little bit of a surprise. Carl Steiner, again in the Rip Oliver booking era, wins the title on his debut, and things kind of go down here from that point. I have Brett Sawyer on this list, even though we've talked about the positives of him as well. For me, it's his perception, his size is why he's on this list. Running through the rest, Rex King, Scott Peterson, they're in the grappler area. Curtis Thompson is in the grappler booking era. And then to round out the list, I have Ali Hassan, who is, I think he was a good wrestler, but he was one of those ethnic stereotypes, the chic type wrestler that Don liked. He liked that, along with the Germans and Russians. But I think he kind of came out of nowhere. And I think of Fidel Cortez, who was a wrestler who was in the groups, the armies and the clans. And I'm reminded of him, Ali Hassan, who wrestled in the Indianapolis area as Jack Kruger, kind of along that line, and surprised that he was elevated to that level. Ricky Vaughn, who looked absolutely fantastic. And it's one of those cases, all the other wrestlers, top wrestlers disappeared and we're left with Ricky Vaughn. He wasn't ready for that spot, and that's not his fault, but he looked great. He just was so green at the time that they put the title on him.
I'm going to give you 6 names real quick of guys who never should have got a title shot, but did. In 1976, long past his prime, Shag Thomas had a championship match against Jesse Ventura. 1976 Shag should not have got that. Could have had a match, but not a championship match. In 1978, there's 2. Mike George versus Ed Wiskowski and Terry Sawyer versus Ed Wiskowski. I don't understand those.
Just one quick comment. Terry Sawyer was barely in the area, and it's almost head scratching. Like it was like he was advertised. Was he here? It was like he was only here for a week or 2 or 3. Very, very short stay. And so, yeah, that's definitely surprising.
In 79, Sal Martino had a match against Roddy Piper. In 83, Sandy Barr wrestled Ali Hassan. And in 1984, Snake Williams, your favorite wrestler, got a match against Rip Oliver. Mike.
It's amazing that and again, this is not to take anything from the wrestler. Snake Williams wrestled a lot in Vancouver, and a little bit surprising that Don Owen would. Any wrestler that wrestled in Vancouver at that time period kind of had a stigma on them, and it's surprising that Don Owen would actually book him into the territory.
Well, not only Don Owen in the territory, his championship match, Snake Williams, was in Salem. And so maybe Elton or Sandy at that time, something was off because I don't understand that one. But anyway, those are some great lists. Mike, you did a great job. We've counted them down. We've debated the numbers. We've looked at championships, title defenses, quality of opposition, and just how much a wrestler's body of work should matter. And after that, we both ended up in the same place with Buddy Rose at number 1. Is that not correct? No.
That is not correct.
I have Buddy Rose. He has Bull Ramos. Both tremendous choices at the top. Now, I have a feeling that some of our listeners are going to have some strong opinions. Maybe they've got Rip Oliver at number 1. Somebody probably even voted for Steve Dahl, one of our listeners out there, as number 1. And maybe you're waving the Ed Wiskowski flag because 2 championship reigns with 33 title defenses is one of the most remarkable accomplishments in Portland history. Or maybe you're making the case for Dutch Savage, Billy Jack Haynes, Jay Youngblood, or some of the other great champions. And that's exactly what wrestling history should do. It should be starting conversations. Speaking of conversations, Mike, you didn't do too badly on our very first stop on Passport to Pile Drivers either. Somehow you made it through customs without having your wrestling passport revoked. Of course, Lisa is already smiling, which means she's probably planning our next destination. And if I know Lisa, she's already packing our bags and looking for the hardest questions she can find. So, Mike, enjoy your victory while it lasts. Lisa, put away the hockey stick, would you? And please, for the love of all that's holy, get that maple syrup away from Mike before he starts pouring it on his Doritos. I'm Frank Culbertson alongside
Mike Rodgers.
And for our producer, Lisa, this has been Ringside in Rose City. One ring, one city, 1,000 stories. As we say, this is wrestling. Wrestling the way it should be. And we'll see you next week. Lisa, take us home.
And that's a wrap from Ringside in Rose City, where one ring, one city, and 1,000 stories never fail to deliver. I'm Lisa Hughes, and this has been a Yaski production. Catch every episode on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your wrestling fix. Until next time, keep your boots laced, your popcorn buttered, and your stories ready.